Okay. So Carol and I run this course called the Credential, ICF Credential Prep course. And we came up with the idea, we wrote the program, we got it accredited, we did so much to get it going. And then there's so much stuff in there that we kind of like ripped a page out of our course guide and thought, let's share what a week looks like with people in the event that you want to learn something for free, but also you might be pursuing a credential, or you just want to get some mastery skills going. So that was the intention behind this. As most of you know us, and if you don't, Carol went to ICA around the same time I did. We stayed connected through social media. Where do you live in Pennsylvania? Anything else we should know about you, Carol?
Oh my. Well, yes, I do. I live just west of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So that's mid-Atlantic states, a little bit further south than you do. Yeah, we both, as you said, we're both coaches for too long. Makes us, we're officially dinosaurs. We'd say that.
Yeah. We're not as extinct yet, but it's around the corner.
So yeah, and I have a sort of varied career. I started out as a professional musician and then wound up with a fairly long stint in law as well before I became a coach. So the mediation that I did in law and in the court system really drove me to decide to do coaching. So yeah, that's my background. Yeah.
Thank you, Carol. So as promised, you notice I used an expletive when I said the coaching agreement. It is something that coaches bring up over and over, whether you're a new coach or an experienced coach. Maybe you've decided to submit a recording as part of your ICF credential, and you learned maybe the hard way how important ICF sees this. But let's move away from we should do this, we got to do this because someone said we should do this. I started out like many of you. What do you need an agreement for? It's assumed. It feels funny to ask that question. And I got to admit, in the beginning, I didn't pay much attention to it. In fact, the competencies only spoke about the general agreement for the contract. They never talked about, it kind of was assumed that in each session that you would craft an agreement as to where you're going, how do you know you're going to go there? So you would indeed be truly coaching and not mentoring or leading your client. So they put that in the recent update, they got really clear on that. So now we are, as coaches, expected to have this as part of the session structure. And I don't know, I'm going to ask you, what is the challenge around the coaching agreement? Carol and I have heard it, but what in this room, what do you think is the challenge for you, or has been for you? Perhaps you have an experience to share that you met the challenge.
I'll speak to it. I personally have never found it a challenge, only because I ran a nonprofit agency for 30 years before coaching, or well, I started coaching quite before the end of that 30 years. But and I learned with I learned from working with my adoption clients how very important it was to have an agreement, to be very clear on what was expected of them, what they could expect of us. So, I haven't really found it a challenge. I found it imperative, and it really gives direction and protection and puts clients, I think, more at ease when they know what to expect. And
okay, great. Yeah, so it's a professional approach, whether you're a head of a nonprofit doing mediation, right, Carol? In mediation, you got to know where people want to wind up so that, everybody's on the same page, at least, maybe not how to get there, but at least where they want to go. What else might be challenging, or maybe how have you met that challenge?
Well, I'm a newbie to coaching. I only started my courses in March, and on a second level of courses, that's bringing me up to the education requirements, the PCC, but I'm not even ACC or anywhere near there yet. And it was in my second course in June when it started that in my first course, they didn't talk too much about the coaching agreement within a session. They talked very vaguely about it. They said there should be one. And then in my second course, they got into details. In my school, they have 4 sections of it: the topic, the meaning, success criteria, and the outcome. And I was really, really struggling with success criteria. It seemed like when I asked my clients about that, they would talk about success criteria like outside of the session, like achievement. And it felt very awkward, like I felt like it was formulaic because like I was trying to get them to answer a question so I could tick that box, so that's why I was intrigued when Emily posted this in the Facebook group this morning. I was like, oh, maybe I can get some more insight. Carol's been so helpful in the book club and the other webinar we did this week. So that's why I'm here.
Randy, that sort of brings me to one of the things that I was going to say, and I think Merci would agree with this too. It's one of the reasons that we talked about even doing this credential prep course, is that coaching is often taught in a way that is very formulaic. And one of the reasons for that, Merci and I can both attest to, is that when it was initially taught, that was the way to do it. In other words, give you a whole fistful of tools. And I know, Randy, you've seen me use that analogy where you waddle in with a bunch of tools and into a coaching session that you're sort of laden down with. The difficulty is what's taught with that side by side is follow the client. And so you're thinking, okay, now wait a minute, how do I follow the client and yet at the same time have some sort of agenda or agreement? And part of the difficulty I find is that, and I train coaches, so I think part of the difficulty is putting those two things in a juxtaposition that actually work. And then the other part of it, quite frankly, is the English word agenda or agreement. Because you could really have a coaching session, as we've talked about in book club, where you're actually seeing what would be the most supportive way to spend our time today. That's still an anchor, or put a pin in it, as they say these days, of where you really want to make sure you're checking in to have your focus. But I think that's one of the things that you just highlighted. The program that you're taking, and nothing bad about any of it, is that the way that they've chosen to teach it, because it's kind of amorphous the other way, is that you really need to stick with a formula. And then what happens invariably, I've seen it in a zillion recordings, I know Merci could attest to this as well, and I've seen it in a zillion classes, is you just do the check because you want to make sure you're not wrong. And the problem is when you're asking a question like measurability of this outcome, if the client knew, they wouldn't be coming to you for coaching at that point. It's something that you're going to be asking down the road. And so I think that's part of our problem, which is why I very much agree with Merci with that expletive of the agreement, because it's terrifying, because we sort of feel like we need to come down on one side or the other. And I find, and I'm sure you say that too, Merci, I find that coaches, as they're learning, are one way or the other. We're either going to follow that stream of consciousness into nowheresville, or we're going to have a formula and then the client really doesn't know what to say. I'm glad you highlighted that.
Well said. Put it in a nutshell. That's our conflict, right? We want to have the dance of coaching. That's another terminology. But, use that metaphor, a dance. Okay, you could free form it, like just get out there and do whatever your body wants. But let's say you're two people, one wants to tango and one wants to freestyle it. You're not going to get very far. It's going to be frustrating for both people. So think about it as a support. And I like the way Carol used that word when we're asking, what do you need today? What would you like? It doesn't have to be a goal. It doesn't have to be an achievement. You don't have to measure it with a scale, that 1 to 10 scale that people are fond of using. Drop that as soon as you can, because it's coaching cliche. Not everyone thinks like that. I mean, if your client came and said, I'm at a 3 and I'd like to be at a 7, okay, now that resonates with that person, right? Anything else? We noted that there's somewhat of a confusion following the client and setting the agenda. We touched on this measurement, what's this sort of challenge of figuring out the success, how to picture success. And Carol mentioned also the timing. When do we begin to think about the agreement? So anybody else want to throw something else into this conversation before we go through our 3 things? Hi, Izzy, go ahead.
Hi, Merci. So first of all, thanks for inviting me on your call. Sorry, I was just talking to him. And then, yes, to take me back to experience, the one day I was sitting in a coaching session when one of my coaches actually said that they wanted to coach me because they needed some, I suppose, marks or something for her ICF. And as I was talking to her, because obviously she was asking me questions, I realized, because I couldn't see her face, the camera was off, I realized during the session that she was actually working on a tick list. And it was, at one point I felt like it felt so frustrating, because now you have to kind of stop and tick and stop and tick. And it's like, either you ask the questions and then do the paperwork later, then actually doing the paperwork while coaching, because now you're distracting the person. Even though you didn't see the person online, you get distracted by the whole thing, So I think that's a big thing for many people. When you see an agreement, you're like, should I stick to it? What should I do? And if you don't stick to it, again, you're going to get frustrated, or you're going to feel like you failed along the way, because now you've not lived up to that agreement. So it's going to be a mind-blowing thing for everybody. And if you do stick to the coaching agreement or whatever, then who's going to celebrate afterwards, you or the client? Because now the client thinks, okay, the coach did his job, but did he really go ahead and help the person to lead to the goal? So yeah, I think, in my own opinion, with any agreement, either it's verbally or take the person through the coaching session and see where you can help that person. If you can't help the person, you know what to do with the person. So yes,
and we don't, we can't. What's very interesting is, and anybody who's read The Heart of Laser Focus Coaching, Marion Franklin is fond of saying, she's the author of that book, your job isn't to help people.
Yes.
And it has a shock value, which is of course why she says it. But what she means is, you have an amazing process. You have skills. Then you have your attributes. You're empathetic. You are indeed somebody who cares. But it isn't it's almost like it isn't your job to help. That is the benefit of the coaching. It's a little distinction, but I find that if I'm trying to help, my coaching, kind of doesn't go as well as it could go. All right. Now, that doesn't mean that, some people come to you, they think they want to coach, and of course, they want you to answer or tell them what to do. That, that's a whole nother subject. But for now, this idea that you're ticking boxes, again, the coaching agreement is not, one and done. It's goes throughout the session. It's a subtle way of keeping us on track towards what you said you wanted to have at the end of this session. And if it changes, if we're checking in, wow, it does change sometimes. So we want to be able to be flexible and agile and listen carefully if it's changing for your client. I think that also is something we can't hold on to it tightly. You're literally listening for, is this still in alignment, or I'm hearing something else? Carol, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's absolutely true. I think we don't have a coaching session. I would actually go so far as to say we don't have a coaching session if we don't have some kind of anchor to come back to and say to our client, where are you now compared to where you were before? So if we take out agreement or agenda and think of it as some sort of anchor, almost like the tree that's in my background, you need to tie a rope around it in case you get lost and it gets dark.
Yeah.
So you have to have some sort of anchor, but it can't be to the extent that we have simply asked the question of what do you want out of this session, and how is that measurable in the very beginning, because the client doesn't know. Their first answer is always going to be the topic, which is never the issue. And the other answer is going to be fabricated because no one, including us, I encourage you all to think of yourselves as clients as well. You're not in a different stratosphere than your clients. Honestly, if somebody asked us that, we wouldn't know. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come to you for coaching if I knew the answer.
Yeah.
So I understand how training companies come up with that, because they want to make sure that that those boxes are ticked, that you have been taught those things. But I think that's where Merci and I felt so very strongly about the way this course was put together, to not make the formula anything more than a skeleton.
Yeah.
And I think, Merci, one of the things you said is, and that's just one of the few things I like about Zoom, and I said this yesterday, so Emily and Randy can close their ears, is these little rectangles that we're in, that's our space to allow the clients to just bounce around in it and figure out their own solutions. We're there to hold that space for them, but we're not there to fix it. And I know we've talked about this a million times as well, Merci, that we as coaches all have an overabundance of the helping gene. And we think that's part of what we're supposed to do. And we forget that helping is just providing this area for you to challenge yourself, figure out what you're thinking. But you really only have, a cup of coffee and a fancy sofa conversation if you don't have some kind of a anchor for your conversation. You have to have that.
Right.
That's what distinguishes coaching from a chai tea latte.
Yeah, absolutely. Good way of putting it.
Yeah.
It's really as important for you and your mastery of coaching than it is for your client. You don't do this because your client expects it or the ICF does. It is a safe place for you so that you can, like Carol said, if I know where the tree is, I may not always see it, but I know where it is. And I know in what direction I have to go. I always think of it like a boat on a lake, okay? So you're in the middle of the lake and you can't see the shores. You know they're there, but you can't see them. And that's sort of the confidence you want to have when you're coaching. That's that free, follow the client thing that we all desire, for a conversation to have flow. but we started out, you didn't just jump in the boat from airlifted in, you rowed toward the anchor. So I think the other thing that someone mentioned is, I think it was Iris, adult learning principles, which they're always learning more about. Coaching leans heavily on a couple of those principles. And one of them is adults like to know what to expect. That's why anybody who's ever, interviewed you, or you sign up for a service online, they're going to ask you several questions so that or tell you certain things. This will happen, and then you'll get a link and you'll get an email. We like to know what to expect. We don't necessarily need a lot of detail, but enough, like, never mind this whole fiasco with this link. I can't even talk about it. I might just burst into flames. So the bottom line is, you do it because it helps you.
Mm. And if you're worried about providing value for your client, the fact that you're actually asking, where are you now from where you were at the beginning, is clear representation of value.
Exactly. And you know what? It reminds us as coaches, it's this perfect way of not getting caught up in leading, right? Because why am I leading? I have to check things out because the client has told me what direction they want to go in, right? So I don't have to lead. It keeps it keeps you like clean coaching. You're not leading, you're not, speculating, you're not doing any of those things. You know where the client wants to go. So it frees you up. It really does free us up. And it's not a check off list. When you're training as a coach, yes, it's formulaic, but that's at ACC level. You don't want to stay. I don't care if you have 50 hours. You do not want to stay at the ACC level, because it becomes this giant leap to PCC, and don't even talk to me about the leap to MCC. You want to start right now, taking your training and experiencing it like, the next step, the next level, right? It helps, and creating the agenda with your client also reminds you that this is a partnership. So if you get stuck in the crappy coach syndrome, which, I love that expression, because you think whatever you're doing isn't working, remember, you're only half the equation, right? So we have to, reflect on ourselves. Of course, that's how we learn. But we also have to say, why am I taking this on 100%? So one of the things that I notice, and we all hear about it, coaching the who and not the what, right? Coach the person, not the problem. I think that, I know Carol will probably agree with me. I think that coaches in the beginning don't quite know exactly how you figure that out, because we are strategic by nature. Most of us default to how. So if your client comes and says they want a plan, okay, let's get going. So what would this plan look like? When do you want the plan done? We're right on to strategy. It sort of says, and maybe unintentionally, that, I don't think you know how to craft a plan. But in my 20 years of coaching, I don't know, Carol, maybe you agree with this. Anybody who's come about time management or a plan or a system was pretty good at it in the first place. They had some perspective, some filter that was preventing them from owning it, right? Some belief that wasn't supporting that. Or there's lots of them. I think I have more time than I have. I think there's a better plan out there. There must be a better plan because this one isn't working for me. There's a lot of perspectives that can get us jammed up. So one of the three things is we talk about this importance. I think we've made it really clear. And even if you think it's so painfully clear what the client wants, make sure you speak to it. So it sounds like you would really like to sleep at night instead of worrying about this. And let them tell you, well, it's not so much the sleep. I would like A, B, and C. Or yeah, exactly. All right. So even if you think you're hearing it, check it out with the client. Anything coming up? Anybody want to talk to that point? Okay. So the second thing we talked about is, and I think Randy brought it up, how do I establish the agreement without sounding formulaic? Like we almost see it's like a staccato. The client is, talking and we ask them a few questions and all of a sudden I have to interject this interruption and ask them. So I'm going to show you something that I'm sure we've used this in the course, but it's a really good example. And I captured it with the coaching, with the coaches. Let's see if I can find it. Where is it? I thought I had it tabbed, but I'll find it because it's a really good example of how it can be flow. Or we can demonstrate it right now, Carol or I. You can bring something like a little ditty or a nugget of something that you would maybe bring to coaching, but maybe it's on your mind right now. And we can demonstrate what that marriage of flow and the agreement is about. You might benefit from that. So I don't know, does anyone want to put their hands up for that? Well, I find this thing I'm looking for.
Well, let me just give you a couple of practical pointers while we're thinking about that, and Mercy's looking for the example. And that is to always start out focusing on the person, no matter what the topic is. If you remember that, for example, someone comes in with time management, there's a reason that they've come to you for coaching and haven't figured it out themselves. There's some sort of reason that that's the case. 9 times out of 10, it's either a behavioral perspective of some kind, pattern, or it's a perspective. So there's some sort of behavioral issue underneath it that they haven't solved it themselves, as Merci said very appropriately, at this time. So for example, if they had a time management issue before and whatever worked before isn't working now, there's a reason for that. Maybe circumstances have changed, your life schedule has changed. It's not that you're an abject failure. It's just that for whatever reason right now, this is what you want to get to. What's the behavior that's not working? So you focus on the client themselves. There will become a natural lull or a dip in the conversation, which is a perfect moment, almost a slowing down. For example, there, got the story, there's lots of energy or emotion, whatever it might be attached to it. And then there's kind of a slowing down or a dip for a moment where it's a perfect time for you to ask some question that's associated with what they've said. So what would be the most supportive thing to focus on today? What would you like to explore? What would have the greatest impact on what you're trying to do? That's all going to depend on the words your client used first. And if you follow that, then you're going to then double check it, as Merci said, with your client. So supposing we spend our time working on that today, what do you hope will be different at the end of our conversation? What are you imagining might be different? What are you imagining might be the thing you walk away with or the outcome? But so you see that, so it's wholly different in terms of a flow of saying, what's your topic today? Why is that important to you? And how are we going to measure it when we're finished? Those are ticking things off.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
did you find it, Mercy?
No, I have something else though.
Oh, so I
I-
think those things was sort of, there is a structure to it, but I'm hoping you see that by doing it, and I have to tell you funny, my husband actually bought me a little bit of a skeleton to use this because I used this analogy in a coaching class. He thought it was hysterical, so he bought me a little skeleton where if you are not having the conversation, you've got the skeleton arms and the legs all attached at the neck, if you can envision that. So the body of your conversation or the body of the skeleton doesn't exist if you've actually gone from topic to importance to measurability. There's no body. There's no reason for having that conversation. So I think that's where you really want to be aware enough of the flow that you're able to, at the appropriate time, stick in. So what are we going to focus on today? Or what would be the most, and if for example, in a class I taught earlier today, the question became what would be most supportive because the person was in tears. So I wouldn't have said, well, what would you like to focus on today?
Right.
Or what would be a good agenda? Because the person was very, very upset. So what would be the most supportive way to use our time was the question I asked. And then when she was able to collect herself and give some, okay, so now when we spend the time doing this, maybe what are you hoping to experience? Or what feeling would you like to have? So you can see how it's tailored to the client, but that's still an agenda. And quite frankly, Randy, that's also a measure of measurability.
Absolutely.
Because measurability isn't a 1, 2, 3 steps. It could simply be, okay, I've really had a chance to talk about this. And I'm hoping I'm going to feel maybe lighter when the conversation is over. If that's what they say, then that's what you shoot for. And then towards the end, you're able to say, where is your lightness right now compared to where it was 20 minutes ago?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really
makes
good
sense.
example.
Yeah.
A client, I mean, I can't even add anything. It's so perfect. The bottom line is whatever they say, I remember the most powerful question my first coach asked me, and I was very emotional at the time, said to me, well, what do you need today?
Yeah.
It was simple. And I said, I just needed to get this out and talk to someone. Okay, so where do we go from here? And she did ask me something like, so if you talk it out and get this off your chest, how would that show up after you end the call? Right? It's just as simple, like I feel lighter, or I wouldn't be so confused. I mean, I need clarity. Okay, we got to first figure out what they mean by clarity because we can't assume we know. And that's often one of those first questions are obvious questions, right? Before you get to the topic or the agenda. If someone says, I need clarity, don't assume you know what they mean by that. Or I need, the other one is clarity. I want to make a decision. You need to explore, even if it sounds like you know what they are talking about. Clarity can mean anything, right? Before we establish, okay, clarity is the goal, and how will you know you're clearer? Well, I'd be clearer, right? That's too soon, not enough information. So I found what I was looking for. So before we do some demo, let me walk you through this one. It is something we use. We either use this one or another one in the course. Week 6 is all about the coaching agreement. And we're giving you, like I like to say, the bottom line, right? There's lots written on the power of partnership. There's neuroscience out there that says when somebody decides what they want and go for it, it is more powerful than if somebody tells them what they want. So there's lots of science research to back this up. And if you're curious about it, as I say, Google it. But we want to get down, what does it sound like? Why am I doing this? Why is it so important, right? that's what we want to get across in this module that we teach. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to put forward a scenario. And Pauline gave me permission to use this, so I feel, okay doing that. So basically, she comes to the call, and this is what she said. I'm going to read it, even though you can see it, but I'll give it some, since we don't have an audio, I'll give you some tone. She says, so my children, I have two, are about to finish their year at school. Both of them have had a hard time doing their work. They go to a Waldorf school, which is a little bit different in that at the end of a block or a unit, they have to hand in something called a main lesson book, which is pictures and writing and whatever it is that they're learning about. So they do this work, but actually making the main lesson book is a fight every time. I'm worried that that this is going to go on like it did last summer. It happened last year with my eldest. And I'm like where I basically had to teach an entire unit over the summer. And I really don't want for them to for this to be for them or for me. I'm not sure how to approach them to get them to be more excited about getting it done. All right. So I'm going to unshare it. So because when we're coaching, we don't have, unfortunately, closed captioning. If you do, great, but you're never going to see the whole thing or have enough time. You're relying on your eyes and ears, right? So let's think about this. What would your first question be? What are you curious about? What did you pick up? So if you were going to reflect back what you heard, keeping in mind the person, not the problem, and what would you be your first question, your first curiosity here? Anybody? Dare to be wrong. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll be wrong first. I'm really good at that. I think my first comment would probably be an observation, which is this seems like a really heavy issue for her, and she cares a lot about her children. Mm-hmm. And then I think my first question might be something like, what impact are they struggling? Is that question? What impact is this struggling having on her?
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. You summed it up. Right? We didn't have to go through. So last year this happened and they go to the Waldorf school. All of that is context, but you don't need it to coach. So yes, you might ask her, what has her feeling this way? Or what is the struggle? Or, she really doesn't want to go through this again. That's clear, right? So what else might somebody reflect and first question? Like, what are you curious about? You can just jump in, go off, off mute.
I'd be curious about what this might look like for her if this struggle were not there. What would she most like to see?
Okay. That's a very common question in coaching. What would you like instead? I think it's a little early.
Okay.
That's my thing is validate, right? And I know Iris knows this, so it sounds like you're had this struggle last year, you're anticipating the struggle now, and the last line she says, I'll go back to the sharing, is, I'm not sure how to approach them to get them more excited about getting it done. So we can't, that's not the agreement, but we can explore, what does she mean by that? It's almost like she's got a kernel of an answer for herself. Carol, anything that you notice in this?
Yeah, well, I think what I would focus on too is the fact that that's the decision she seems to have made. And so prior to going any further than that, what else is possible
Mhm.
in that possibility? It sounds almost as though it's an either or. At this point, I wonder what else might be possible, or what's the connection between the struggle that she's alluding to and having already made the decision that this is the way to solve it.
Mm.
So there's a struggle between those two things, and even just asking a question like that might be, oh,
Yeah,
I made a decision already, and I've got myself tied in knots about it, and maybe that's not the way to go. I don't know.
right. Exactly. So you can see there's lots of different ways to go, but exploration, reflection, right? I heard you, I feel you, empathy, sounds like it's a struggle. And, you really think there's a way to motivate them. All right. So I'll share and so the coach says, share, let's go again. All right, so I was the coach. What I'm hearing, Pauline, is that your children have this project, this book they must complete, and it's a fight every time. That's what she said. And you don't want to go into the summer having to teach the whole lesson again. Just reflecting back what I heard. It's a little bit of the story, right? She has this book, Unit Child. But it also has, what is this experience like for her? It's a fight every time, and she doesn't want to go through that. And you asked, how do I get them excited about this? And then this is a question I ask. It's part of the agreement, but it's not only part of the agreement. What's important about getting them excited about this? So it's not the only way to address this by any means. But the idea is, what is in it? I want to know what's motivating her, right? Why is this important to you? When someone speaks to why something is important to them, and what is better, when you say, what about this is important, you're assuming it's important because it came up. And trust, if it's not, they'll tell you, or if it changes. But even though this sounds like this is about the children, I think it's about her, Pauline. What's important about getting them excited about this? All right, so it's too soon to go with the agenda, a coaching agreement. That's just too soon right now. You have to figure out what's really going on, because there is something really going on. Any mothers in the room? Okay. All right. Anybody have a mother? Yeah. Okay. So when I read that first thing she said, what my understanding of human behavior, my own experiences, my wisdom says this is somebody who is concerned about how well they're mothering. That just floats in and out. I don't attach to it, but I'm not going to ignore it. It may or may not be relevant. But this is where your understanding of human behavior, your understanding of what CBT calls mental mistakes, what Marion Franklin calls themes, common perspectives that get in people's way. And one of those is that in a lot of cultures, women feel always, sort of like, I'm not good enough. I'm not going to say it's for everyone, but it's hard when things don't go right, and they won't always go right with children, not to take it personally, not to make an indictment of your motherhood. All right. So I hear all of this in the background, but I'm not going to assume that's what's happening. I want to know what's important to her about this. All right, anything coming up? Go ahead, Izzy.
Mercy, I think there was a lot of questions that obviously came up, and I didn't know if I had to say something. And then the two questions that you showed on the screen, I was thinking about it, but again, which sorry to say. But coming from another point of view, is I think the mom is too scared to, like you said, too scared to stand up for herself and say, you know what, I think she needs to take, this is my point of view. I think she needs to take responsibility of, you know, being that she's the mom, she needs to say, we've been through this trouble, let's try and find a solution. And if she can't find the solutions, she's going to keep on playing the same game over and over until she, you know, until she learns the lesson, or that's what I think. And now the children are finding that, you know, playing up against their mom, and they keep on winning. So the more they're winning the game, the more difficult it becomes for mom just to sort the children out. So they're getting their way and mom is not. So now it's too much pressure on herself. So now her whole confidence are dropping, self-esteem are dropping, you know, let's say her attitude and everything towards her children are now from there to there, it's gone. And
that's really, no, it's okay, Izzy. That's really, like, again, some of the stuff that we speculate in our head, because boundaries could be an issue, right? It could be that she's, you know, somehow complicit in this. And when you think of themes, you know, like boundaries is a theme in coaching. People, you know, people please, they don't say no enough. And then, you know, people take advantage, all of those things. That comes up in coaching a lot. So it is a possibility. It is a possibility that this is a boundary issue. We don't know yet, right? So we have to explore further. Anything, Carol, you want to add to this?
I think what Izzy pointed out actually, though, is something as coaches we have to watch, because that's a trigger for us. Yeah. We have made a judgment in our own mind about what could possibly be going on. And those are the kinds of things that remind me to pull out of that for a minute, particularly being a mother, pull out of those things and say, you know what, I don't know how Pauline is experiencing this. So it's a good opportunity to remind myself that I need to understand Pauline and what she's experiencing. So again, we're now into the person and not the problem, and find that out and see where, you know, what, you know, for her, what is she experiencing? And as you said a little bit ago, I think, Merci, just by saying, you know, what are you experiencing in this struggle? You could narrow it down a little bit and ask about emotions, but I think I really would keep it broad and say, what are you experiencing in this struggle? Which I think, Izzy, would give you more data to know whether this is indeed a boundary issue. She's even perceived it as a boundary issue, or she has that expectation that this is just going to be a repeat of last year and I don't want to do it again, which is her putting her perspective on this year's situation. And that's something to know as well. So when that whole thought process happened for you, it's a good reminder, okay, I got to get out of that. And I need to ask, what is Pauline experiencing here? And you can use the struggle. I hear the struggle, or it sounds like quite a struggle. What are you experiencing in those moments? And that will help you know, is it, I just don't want to do this again, which is something completely different than the boundary issue. Or is this, even the boundary issue is is a systemic situation in the family. Am I
Yes.
always having trouble setting boundaries?
Mhm.
But asking her what she experiences would open up that exploration as to what this might be.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the key is, I think Debbie said it too, you reflect back and then you want to know more about what's making this a struggle, what's important to you about this. You mentioned you wanted to get them excited, what has you going in that direction, any of those curious questions. I feel that coaches don't use their intuition enough. It says we have permission according to the ICF. The thin line, okay? It's kind of a blurry line. What I said about what I'm imagining could possibly be the issue, what Izzy said possibly being the issue, you can trust that, but it's not a fact, right? It's like, oh, I usually find myself parking it. So, or I might just write down boundaries.
Or test it out.
Yeah, or test it out. Exactly.
Or test it out, but test it out with the, what do you think?
Yeah,
Or
definitely.
what comes up when I say that? Yeah, you could.
Yeah. I mean, and you don't want to do that too soon either.
Right.
It's like, there's a certain energy that someone comes in with this in this kind of struggle. You don't want to sugarcoat it, move past it and say, so to me, that's why, what experience do you want to have? I don't think I understand fully what her experience is yet. That's why I feel that's premature, but it's a good coaching question. The same with, it sounds like there's a struggle, so let me see. And I'm not saying the way I did it, the reason I'm showing you this is I'm trying to show flow and the agreement. That's my objective. Yeah. Okay, so let me just, all right, go ahead, Carol.
I just want to say I've got to hop off, everybody.
All right.
Good to see y'all.
Thank you for coming, Carol.
Absolutely. Take care.
Get rid of that. All right. So here's what I said as a reflection. What I'm hearing, Pauline, is, and I talked about this, and what's important about getting them excited. And here's what Pauline says. It would make it a lot easier for me. It would change the dynamic of me and them. Sort of, instead of hitting and butting, heads to get it done, it would be more of like a partnership. More of like a partnership. So we have some more information as to what has her thinking if they were excited, it would work better. Right? Now, I'm not going to undermine that. If she thinks it's possible that that's the solution, that they want to be in partnership, I'm going to go with it. Right? Anybody think about that differently? Okay, I'm going to keep going then. All right. So this is so important. This is only one way to coach, and it's not the only way. What you want to bring into your practice is reflection, to validate, I heard you, focusing more on the person rather than the situation, and exploring what is it like, what's going on for this person. So you get a little bit more insight as to what is the mindset, the perspective, what is causing this person this struggle. She told you already that, they don't want to do it, and she spends her whole life. She told you that, but what's it like, to experience the struggle? But here she tells us, she's about 2 minutes in, she thinks if it was more of a partnership, if I got them excited, it would be easier. She's giving you a clue as to something she may have already thought about, right? So the next thing, okay, so the butting of heads that you just mentioned, what do you notice about that and its effectiveness? This is a little bit leading, all right? If I just changed a few words and said, so what's the connection with getting them excited and butting heads, or gone in another direction. Anybody, let's see, she just said this. What might be your next question? Anybody, somebody. Trying to get the screen to go back up. There we go. Anybody? Think about it. What are you curious about? What's your next thought? It doesn't have to be right or wrong or one you would ask, just what comes up for you. Go ahead, Randy.
I might ask her what the partnership would look like in her mind.
Okay. Right. What does she mean by partnership? Yeah. Because she's introduced that concept. What might need to be addressed in order for you to approach this like a partnership? And then whenever you say, to me, I always do this. What might need to be addressed? What do you mean by a partnership? Don't worry about asking, and what else does it mean? Or what else has to be addressed? Because people tend to give you the first thing on their top of their mind. The what else question is really powerful. All right. Okay. Anybody else before I go to what was said? All right. Here we go. Oh, share the screen again. Here we go. All right. So this is what I said. I don't think this is a great, I was coaching. And I'm telling you right now, you're never going to be perfect. And that's okay. I have to be comfortable as a coach, which is one of the competencies, to be in a space of not knowing. And that's a space that's a learning space, right? If you go in to learn something, you have owned that you don't know something, right? But what happens here for many coaches, the very experience of being trained as a coach instills one with apprehension about being right. And that's, coaching presence means I am comfortable in a space of not knowing. And if you have, that's a hard one. Who has something to say there? No? Is that you, Izzy?
Yes, me. Come on, dear. Sorry, I got distracted again. So yes, the fact that you said not, being in a space of not knowing, that is true, because to go in more deeper, as you mentioned before, you have to ask questions. You have to reflect back on what you've heard and ask more and more powerful questions. Sometimes, like you said before, you have to either ask open-ended questions, and sometimes you tend to ask closed questions, and then you form, a whole bunch of information, but then you have to reflect back and say, but this is what I heard, is that correct? So that you could stay on the same, I could say, wave. And sometimes it just happens that you might say the wrong thing, and then it changes the whole course.
Yeah.
And again, it's like a dance. We don't know what we're going to do in that dancing session, but what we do know is we know which music we're going to play, for instance. So that's exactly the thing. And being comfortable in an uncomfortable situation, or keeping space for that person when he's got a mental meltdown or whatever, it's just, I've experienced my first mental or my meltdown before with a client, and I realized in that moment that you shouldn't say something. You should keep that space open and wait for the person, or the client rather, to say something more, and yet be comfortable with that, with that few minutes of not saying anything, but allowing the energy to flow through through that person, whether it's online or in-person connection still, so yes, I think
Well, thank you
that's
for sharing that. I think that's really part of the flow, right? The pause is as important to the flow as any observation, reflection, or question that you have.
yes.
And it's in everyday conversation, it's probably not something we do a whole lot of. But it's like checking things out. Like, first of all, most clients, even if they're coaches, they don't really, they're not sitting there judging you and your questions. If they brought something legitimate to the conversation, odds are they are open. And we have to trust that. So she says that butting heads is not effective at all. All right. Now you notice we still don't have an agreement. We're still exploring. It takes up way too much time. I don't see any reason why my eldest is especially like this, where she will have an utter meltdown, and then we have to work through the meltdown. And then by the time the meltdown is over, we've sat down and we started working again. It's been 2 hours that could have been more productive. So she's given you, in a way, I think, the reason why, right? What is motivating her? What is the drive here? It's the avoiding a meltdown, right? Making the most of their time together. So the next thing, I'm just watching the clock a little bit. So what is it like for you as a mom to experience this? So Carol mentioned experience a little bit earlier, and you could have used it then. I just, it made sense here to me, right? And I used as a mom because my intuition was somewhat that this is related to parenting, or, some beliefs around her parenting. I mean, she is a mom. She's talking like a mom. This is a mom issue. So I don't feel, apprehensive about what's it like for you to experience this as a mom. It's sad and it's frustrating. And it brings back my own memories of having to try to get work done and feeling so overwhelmed with school. I don't want that for them. Bingo. Do you see how that this is driving her struggle? Right? Of course, we agree. We could all be saying, yeah, that's a good idea. You don't want to repeat something that wasn't good for you. We all understand that. But this is significant for her. She is, in a way, imagining, that this is going to be for them what it was for her. Anybody see anything else? So I think I said, so you don't want this for them. And this, it's 3 minutes in, and you see, well, some people might go back and pick at that memory scab. There's nothing wrong with that, but you don't want to, you dip into the past, but you don't stay there. All right. So a question that I could have asked is, so what are you noticing about this experience you're having and the experience you had as a kid? But you kind of already told me. I don't want to ask something the client already knows. When Carol mentioned, what is the link? You kind of ask those questions when it seems like your client hasn't seen a link and you're wondering maybe there is a link. So you check it out. But I didn't do that here. And this is where I came in very naturally. I said, so you don't want them for that. You don't want this for them. So I acknowledged what I heard. And either of those questions is the beginning of an agreement. People see that? It doesn't feel out of left field. Or maybe it does to you. Does it feel like formula?
No, I think it evolves very naturally, and she clearly has an awareness of what she doesn't want, what she'd
Yeah.
like to do differently or have differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And to sort of, sometimes it's interesting. She could say something about what she needs for the coaching that I haven't even thought about, right? So again, we want to be open. And she says, let's see, what does she say? Maybe I want to come up with some strategies. This is very, very typical of us. We are more comfortable, a part of our brain tends to rely on analytics and reason and strategies. But not, she says, but not really strategies. I have a lot of them. So she has a nice awareness about that. It's more of a different mindset I'm going into this, because I think in some ways my mind is already, there's going to be a fight. And someone mentioned that earlier. She's already anticipating, which is a projection, understandable given what she experienced last year, but what she's pointing out in a way is it's not useful. Right? There's a lot of things we do that are understandable, but aren't useful. So, so changing that may give me more space to be positive. All right. So we're not going to go with strategies. I want to reflect back what I heard. So what do you think you need to address to have this more positive mindset? All right.
Merci, can I come in real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, Debbie.
So you have a great client here who kind of is going through that. If you back up a second, like where she says maybe to come up with some strategies, here's what happens to me sometimes. I will have gone through kind of conceptually, like where we've gone through the prior sequence, and you say, okay, so what do you need from coaching? I'll have a client go back to the topic and be like, I just want my kids to stop battling me. So then we're like right back to square one.
Okay.
So I don't mean to take you off course, but like,
No.
So when I saw the title of your, I think, the expletive coaching agreement, I'm like, oh my God, help me.
No, I think, first of all, you got to remember, most people default to the story.
Right.
We learn by narrative. We are narrative creatures. So that's going to happen. What the coach's responsibility is in thinking, if I prolong the story by my questions. So what do you think needs to be addressed? Telling you that she doesn't want it to happen. Okay, so that didn't get us anywhere. And that happens. So maybe there is a better question, right? I just don't want, I'm struggling and I don't want it anymore. I'm done, or something like that. All right. So it sounds like you're really frustrated. I don't use tell me more about that because I think there's really a question there. But be careful not to reflect too much of the story. If someone gets caught up in just going over the problem over and over and over again, no matter what you're asking, bring that to their attention. So it seems like we're, kind of driving the car around a circle here. How can you get out of this lane? Using an analogy, a metaphor is so powerful. It tends to stop people, like short. Now, this doesn't mean, Debbie, that some days you're just going to have a client who just wants strategies, and that's got to be good enough. You raise the issue of mindset and perspective, and if they're not ready, they're going to go back to I need help. Okay, what kind of help do you think you need?
Thanks.
Yeah. I have another example. I'm trying to think what it was. Oh, so if I had said, you know, here's questions focusing on the story. So, you know, it would be things like, so, you know, tell me more about this book they have to make. All right. And I say to them, you know, you know, she goes, the big McGill, I have to do this. Okay. So what else, how else could you approach this? You see, I'm now into the how questions because she's looking for strategies. Sometimes it unfolds like that. Somebody's stuck and I want a plan, I want better time management, and I have to honor that. I can bring up, so, you know, sometimes it's not so much how we manage time, it's our perspective about time. What do you think? You can share that kind of wisdom. And I don't know who said it, but if if I was coaching and couldn't remember who said it, I might say, you know, I don't remember who said this, but you know, having time means making the time. Especially if someone's saying they want to meditate, they want to exercise, they want to eat clean, blah, 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 but they don't have the time. So what if it was, you know, if we were to consider making the time, what comes up for you? So a person can skirt right over that. You know, they could just say, I've tried that, it doesn't work. I put it in my calendar. All right, now I want to know what's important to you about this, because if someone's not doing something they ostensibly said was important to them, they're committed to something else, right? And that's why we reflect back and, you know, go with the client. If you really think they're not getting the bigger picture, fine, meet them where they are. Remember, in coaching, relationship trumps results. This is a partnership and a relationship, right? And that's sometimes as good as it gets. I wouldn't submit that recording to ICF, but sometimes that's as good as it gets. It's just don't fall into that trap. People get, you know, comfortable with that because all of us, basically, not many of us said, I want to get into coaching because, you know, I don't really want to help people. I just want to be a person who delivers this process. No, I want to help people. I'm a solution-focused person. I'm strategic. Those things are good, but elevating it to a little bit more when your client is ready.
That's super helpful. I really appreciate that because there are some, you have brilliant clients, and there are some are like, I don't get it. Right? You're like, what have I done wrong? And so thank you for that validation.
Yeah, no, it, you know, especially if you're doing like workplace coaching, you know, somebody said, oh yeah, we have a contract, so, you know, you can have 6 sessions. They don't vet them. They don't say whether they're coachable or not. You'll get the stuff, the person that wants an answer. You need to tell me what to do. I need some advice. I need some strategies. I need a plan. It's just don't fall into that right away. Right? So what would a plan do for you? What's with the plan you have now? So the scenario I was just thinking of, the client came and said that she wanted to be productive, that she was exhausted at the end of the day, and she had like a foggy thinking, and she wasn't getting to things that she wanted to get to, and she starts to list them: relationships, my health, and my personal and professional development. So what the first thing I hear is she wants it, you know, she wants some magic formula, because what I heard there was, you already don't have enough energy and now you want to plop. This is like going to the buffet, but you know, your plate's full up to the top, it's going to tip over. So I wouldn't say it like that, but you know, you can use things like that. So it sounds, something's not adding up here. You know, you're already, exhausted at the end of the day. What, you know, what has you thinking, you know, that you can fit this in? So what's realistic about that? What else is possible? Now, that particular person, the coach struggled because she actually said these words: I need to be productive every single minute of every day. And then she said something about, and rest is productive. But she didn't hear herself say that because she wasn't acting like someone who had now married rest into her production. And so the coach struggled. The coach struggled because that was her perspective. So we have to notice things, you know, and bring them forward. You know, you want to be productive every single minute of every single day. What about that's important to you? Because something's driving that. And likely it's some belief, some old belief. And she may or may not be able or willing or have the capacity in that moment to explore what has her thinking that way. All right. So let's finish up this and all right. Talked about the meltdown, what would be valuable. She says that, you know, I don't really need strategies. I think in some ways it's my mindset that has to change. What do you need to address to have this more positive mindset? I like this question because a lot of people come to you and they'll say, I got to buck up. I got to think positive, you know, or they've swallowed the Kool-Aid that says, if I sugarcoat everything, I'll be positive and things will be great. But obviously they're not. So you bring this up. What's important to you? You know, what might be here? I could have asked, so what would be a positive mindset? I could have asked her that. What do you mean by a positive mindset? It would just be as valid as this question. This is really practicing more laser-like coaching, but it's still, you know, it still would meet ICF. Okay, she talks about her expectations. I'm already into summer where we're still doing this and I'm still having this fight. I think I need to get rid of that in my conversation with them because it's negative and it's not positive. All right, she's come up with a strategy, right? So we know now what she wants to address. Has she had a little shift in thinking? Has that struggle and frustration energy dissipated, leveled off a little? Yeah, definitely. This is when you start to really craft the agreement, because there's a willingness now to get out of the perspective that got her in this in the first place. Go ahead, Izzy.
Sorry for interrupting. When you were talking previously, I thought about the strategic question, and would that have been an appropriate timing to ask, okay, what strategic or practical step would you, you know, do to try and solve the problem that you were sitting with? Maybe then she would then try and figure out by herself, you know what, this is what I've done, and this is what and it didn't work. Now I'm going to try and do this and see if it's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so
Yeah.
would that be a great idea to put it there, or should it come in the end? That's
Well,
actually.
I think the minute the client told you about it's not so much strategies, it's mindset. Now we're going to stick with mindset. You know, what would be a mindset? What would it do for you? What would that feel like? All right. Any of those exploring questions. Something else you said, Izzy, but it'll come to me. We, you know, in a way, truly, before you nail down what they want to have at the end of the session, they should have lessened their grip on their current perspective. Not maybe, aha, that doesn't happen. You have to chip away sometimes. But you notice there's a teeny tiny light. There's an opportunity. There's an opening. And that's when you say, so what do you need from the coaching? What would make this session valuable to us? Or so you think it's a positive mindset. What would that look like? How will you know you have a positive mindset? What would be different? Those are all a measurement, what's important to you, what needs to be addressed, are all those coaching agreement questions. All
I
right?
see. I see.
Mhm.
Thank you, Merci.
Okay. So, then I heard her. So at the end of this session, you would want to have a more positive mindset, which would inspire them. So what inspires your children? And again, inspires one of those words we all, inspiration, but do we really know what she means by it? So that's why I asked that question. So she gives some ideas, right? Some ways she can do this. And then now she, it doesn't take too long so that I have little things to look forward to sooner. All right, so she's got a strategy. Now, as the coach, I'm recalling something. All right. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that you had some memories of being like this as a child. What inspired you as a child to get the work done and not procrastinate? Curious, purely curious question, because she mentioned it earlier. And then she says, I just gave up. She gave up. And that's her fear here. That's the fear underneath this, that either she will give up or they will give up. And that, honestly, it was just an intuitive thought. I saw the link. I was curious. She did mention that, this was something she struggled with as a child. Okay, so you gave up. What role, and like Carol would always say, what role, if any, did this play when you were working with your children, this giving up? All right. All right. So she tells us, she gives us some insight here. I'm trying to find that balance. And how do you recognize that balance in your life? Again, that's an agreement question. I think the only way I can tell is that they get stressed, but they aren't so stressed that they can't get the work done. And what would that be like for you to experience that balance? So we're inviting her to try this on and really, dance around in this new idea. All right. It's still hard for me because I'm not used to this kind of balance. But there's a part of me that's really happy that they're in that space. So that's what she imagined. That's what she's envisioning, right? And I think that's where we ended it. So at that point, I think that whole conversation, let me get this here, was about 10 minutes. So what prolongs the session generally is asking questions about the situation, asking questions that the client already knows. I know what I was going to say. I used to ask this question all the time and I stopped. So what have you done so far? Because wait a minute, if it was working before, why you want coaching around this? And the client already knows, do I really need to know what she's done before? I don't know. I don't know if that gets us anywhere. And I used to say it all the time. Now I might say something like, I had a client come to me struggling with getting his family to communicate, getting them all, in one room to have a dialogue. Now, I know that he is a master team builder. That's his like superpower. So I said, I know that we've, shared with me your accomplishments about building teams. What if you looked at your family as if they were your team? So that's taken it way out of the box. He never thought of that. I don't know how many people would have thought of that, but for some reason it occurred to me. That's because I had coached this person before and I knew them. Yeah. So before we complete, anything else that I can answer or clarify for you guys? I'm sorry Carol had to lead. I know she's a busy girl in the summer, especially with her aqua aerobics and that kind of stuff. All right, go ahead, Randy.
I'm just wondering, what could you do in a polite way? You kind of touched on it briefly, but and I know even I do it when I'm peer coaching and I'm playing the coachee. I'll start telling a story that's way too long. And I get it. Clients do it and I've done it too. And I'm like doing it. I'm like, Randy, got to shorten this for the coach. It's like taking up the whole session. What can you, is there anything we can do about that as coaches?
Okay, yes, there's a couple of really easy things. First, if you feel that it's not productive, and basically if you're not sure, you could ask. In the beginning, I'm a little more generous with time. Some people, verbally process, there's neurodiversity going on, whatever. But if I've established the agreement and I notice that they're telling this really long story, I might interrupt, and I don't even use the word interrupt. I say, is it okay if we pause here? See, pause is a gentle invitation. And I ask them, is it okay? Use their first name. Okay, so if I'm coaching Randy, I would say, and she's on with her story, and I say, Randy. Usually most people will stop at their name. So is it okay if we pause for a moment? Here's what I'm hearing so far. Or it seems like there's a moving away from the question, blah, blah, blah. I'm wondering what's happening for you. And your experience of when you tell a long story, all right, we all do it. What's happening for you? What is your process? Because it'll help you be empathetic with the person who's doing it. Mm-hmm. Right?
So, but what happens to me, that happens too. So I wrote down notes, so that's good. But what happens also is, like, I can't even find out what the topic is. They just start with this big story and we haven't even set the contract, because I can't even figure out what's the issue, what's the topic. And it's just like a 15-minute story.
And there's a competency here. You as the coach are responsible for managing the time and focus of the session. So, can I pause here for a moment? We're 15 minutes into our session and I'm wondering, can you sum this up for me? It's a lot of information, take it on yourself. Can you sum this up? Thomas Leonard, grandfather of coaching or something, but anyway, he used to use something like, can you bottom line this for me? Mm-hmm. It's okay to be direct. And if I feel like, it's not a good use of our time, I have to say something. Mm-hmm. I can, we have this much time together and I really want it to be valuable for you. So I'm wondering, what do you really need me to know? But you do have to sometimes do that,
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Emily.
Randy and I are going to practice coaching. We're going to peer coach each other, and I'm going to do a long story and make her listen to it.
Oh, good.
Because I wanted to jump in because I wanted to say it makes me uncomfortable whenever this topic comes up, because I know there's this focus on like getting to the point and moving through and next, but I can honestly think of more than one coaching conversation where I've been the client, just as where I've been the client and it's seemingly random rambling of all these things that I'm like, oh, and then there was this and like this happened and I was like, I don't know, bear with me, I don't know where I'm going. And it ends in this perfect point of like, oh my God. And if somebody had been like, Emily, zip it up, throw it in the garbage, you're rambling way too much, I would have,
Yeah, no, you don't want to be, you
and
don't
like
want to be judgmental.
jolted.
You know, it's about what is effective. You're having an effective conversation, right? That's the bottom line. If you need to process out loud, which a lot of people do, they almost come up with their own, awareness just by talking it through. Well, let them go. Again, I wouldn't put that at the ICF recording because it doesn't give you enough opportunity to showcase your skill and competencies. If someone self-coaches, frankly, that's okay. All right. So I'm noticing the time. So Izzy, is it something you can say short and sweet?
Yeah, quick story. I remember when I met Merci the first time or the second time around, I was so frustrated with all the coaching and the stuff. And then I was talking and Merci said, wait a minute, just wait, let's go back down a bit. So yes, I understand that, you want to say a lot of things, but when, I could have said a lot of things and got my own solution and walked out, but that's not the idea. The idea is really just to ask these questions to help a person find the solution, I suppose. So yes.
I mean, it does happen. Let me just say, and you know what? When you coach leaders, people in the C-suite, they talk a lot because you are an enigma to them. Like you don't have any agenda, you don't work here. So they feel free, you don't to talk. And I'll give you an example. I'll end with this. I was paired with this guy through a coaching firm because he's from Brooklyn. Shout out to Iris in Brooklyn. And, I grew up down in that area. I'm very direct. And so the people matched us. So he comes on to the call, first call. He is telling me everything. I just got this job. I'm in it 8 months. They keep giving me too much to do. I'm writing speeches. I'm sitting on committees, and my manager should be stopping all of this and stop giving me things. And so this went on. I'm not kidding you, 40 minutes. And I just let it go. Here, and so we're finishing. He finally was quiet, and I said, "So it sounds like someone who's like giving away their power, sort of like a victim. What do you think?" All right. It stopped him in his tracks. He ran right over it. But by the time we finished the hour, he was saying it to me as if it was his idea. So, that was a good session. I got the one bullseye question out, right? So again, ICF coaching, there's a lot to be learned in the competencies, and they are the sort of a place we're going, but doesn't show up like that every single time. That's, and there's no such thing as pure coaching, like that surmises that something else is evil, but you're doing the best you can. That's what I have to say. Do the very best you can, because if you could do better, you would. Right? All right, guys. I really appreciate this. I'll send the recording around. If someone tells you I didn't get the recording, please let me know and I'll send it right out. I tried to keep track of everybody. So I appreciate your patience with this whole process.
Thanks,
Take care of
Merci.
yourself.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Merci.
Appreciate you. Thanks so
Yeah.
much.
So nice to see you and